Welcome to Divisionalysis. I'm Fog. It's weapon comparison time. It's round one of assault rifles. I'm going to go through the methodology of how I came up with all the figures. Then we're going to go into the comparisons themselves, and finally we are going to finish up with the rankings. Hope you're ready. Let's go. Okay, before we get started, if this is the first video of mine that you're coming to, then you probably would have had a lot of questions by the end if I didn't give you an introduction, and it serves as some clarifying points to let you know what you're going to be seeing today. So in the last video, I introduced a damage per second graph. And I showed the graph of the FAMAS versus the ACR. I think there was some confusion thinking that I might have had shares in the ACR and that somehow I was saying that the ACR was a better weapon. No, I want to make this very clear. I just wanted to show you that at certain points in time, early on, when the damage required to be done is quite low, there are definitely points at which the ACR will actually win that race. But spoiler alert, you can very clearly see that over the duration, the FAMAS is winning. But what I also want to point out is that as we approach the end of the graph, and we've specified that more damage needs to be done, then the results start to clarify. The FAMAS very clearly becomes the more consistently better weapon. But thankfully, when we're talking about PvE, the specified amount of damage is going to exist down this end of the table, where the variance has reduced and the results have clarified. There was some confusion thinking that I was only ever going to deal with sustained damage. Now, this is not the case. So this is the graph of damage per second when you apply damage in bursts. In this graph, we've asked the weapon systems to burst down an enemy, reload, burst, reload, and so on and so forth. And as you can see, under this methodology, there is no chance for the ACR to catch up. The FAMAS has a higher 1 mag damage, and it also has a lower reload speed. So 1 enemy, 2 enemies. In this period of time, the FAMAS has actually delivered or has dispatched 9 enemies in the same period of time. The ACR has only killed 8. So spoiler alert, the FAMAS is better at bursting damage. But in reality, what we do is we actually try and sustain damage for as long as we possibly can. The only difference between sustained damage and burst damage is, did I choose to reload, or was I forced to because I ran out of bullets? And in game, we mix the two. This is what it looks like when you average the two. So there still is quite a lot of variance when there is less damage to do. So PvP players, you live in this zone here. When it comes to PvE, we live out in this zone out here where things have rationalized, and actually at a point past 17 seconds, nowhere does the ACR compete with the FAMAS. Spoiler alert. The issue up to this point has been that we have confused ourselves with our own terminology. The only weapon that actually burst fires is the M16. Every other weapon is either single fire or it is automatic. For assault rifles, it's automatic fire. And when you pull down the trigger, you are sustaining damage until you release that trigger. So the old metrics of burst DPS and sustained DPS never ever aligned. When in reality, if you haven't reloaded yet, they should 100% align. And this is sustained DPS. Sustained meaning that I am sustaining the fire until I am forced to reload. And up until the point where you are forced to reload, this method of calculation will produce exactly the same results as what the old burst DPS calculations were. Remembering that you weren't actually bursting anything, you were sustaining your damage for as long as you possibly could, and that's exactly what you see here. When you are bursting, you are just sustaining the damage until you choose not to, and if the damage is set at less than one magazine, an equation should produce the exact same result, whereas under the old method they were as far apart as they possibly could be. But under this new method of looking at things, whether it's sustained or whether it's burst, you will receive and produce exactly the same results when the damage is less than one magazine. Damage that you've produced has been sustained and consistent, and the results of any equations should be consistent as well. That's what we see here. Now, there was also some confusion about specifying the damage or controlling the damage. We don't get to control the damage. When we run into a room, the damage is already specified for us. We are told that we need to kill 3, 4, 5, 6 enemies before we're able to progress. And if you know this mission, there's also 7, 8, and 9 that pop out of this door before you can actually progress. So in this instance, it is 9 enemies that the game has specified that you must kill before you can move on. How much damage is that? Well, that's a mix of red health, it is a mix of veteran health, and in many ways it'll include elite health. And there's a mix of armor and health, and that's going to affect average bullet damage. Now, sometimes the game specifies that you only need to deal with one enemy. It's very, very rare. I can think of maybe 2 instances. I think there is the Russia that is on their own in bank headquarters next to the electrical box. And there is, in District Union Arena, there's the one Russia that stands next to the gate. But other than that, it's going to be higher. The amount of damage that is required for you to do is going to be higher. Because the damage that's specified the game is always, almost always, going to exceed 1 magazine. What I did is I ran every mission 3 times over to get the average. The truth is that it's going to, the best weapon system is actually going to vary room to room. But because we don't change weapons room to room when we're running a mission, what we want to find out is what is the best in most situations. The average situation that you're going to encounter in one of these missions. So that looks like this. An average wave of 12 enemies. For missions it's lower at 8, and at control points it's at 16. It's actually probably slightly more than 16 because you always, or you quite often will encounter a convoy that arrives during the period that you're trying to clear a control point. But thankfully, by the time we even reach 8 enemies, the variance has disappeared and there is clarity over what the best weapon is going to be. But for today, it's set at 12. 12 enemies with an average health points or health pool of 7.8 million. And what that means is that the calculations are done where we've specified the amount of damage to be done at 93.6 million. So what that looks like is we've asked each weapon system to do this amount of damage. Now for some weapons, that actually only took them 5 magazines. Other weapon systems, it actually took them 8 magazines to do. But that's the amount of damage we asked them to do, so that's what they had to do. For burst fire DPS, the damage was applied in bursts, and that burst was equivalent to the amount of bullets that it took for that weapon system to take down an enemy. If it had a higher burst or a higher 1 mag DPS, then that period of time that it took to take down that enemy was going to be less. But in every situation, the weapon system had to burst down an enemy, then reload. And so in the burst fire DPS calculation, every weapon system had to use 12 magazines and was required to do 11 reloads. So the damage done, or the average bullet damage, was calculated using my test build with an armor percentage of 40%, an out of cover percentage of 82%, and headshots based on 8%. Now that is to allow for the attributes of the weapons to take full effect, or have a reduced effect depending on what the weapon attributes were. So what you're going to see is each weapon system broken down, its base weapon damage and then the average bullet damage based on the test build, the RPM of the weapon, the mag size of the weapon, a 1 magazine DPS. So essentially at an average bullet damage, what is the maximum DPS that weapon can achieve, which is in line with what the old burst DPS calculation would have given. And you'll also see how long that weapon system can sustain that maximum damage. Reload time, and then you will receive the 2 metrics being the sustained DPS and then the burst fire DPS. And at the end, the rankings will be done as a percentage. And why is it done as a percentage? Because this is the graph based on my test build as it is, with no gear, talents, or attributed to it. But what I want to show you is the difference between this graph and if I was, for instance, to put glass cannon on my build. Ready? There. That's it. The damage numbers change, but the graph itself doesn't. The burst fire graph is a little bit more compressed, but it looks very, very similar. Okay, a few caveats. This is about progress, not perfection. I'm on a journey to get closer to the truth. So what is not covered in today's comparison? One is accuracy. So rounds on target does make a difference. And the individual weapons accuracy. I am still trying to think of a way to scientifically test a weapon's accuracy without human input. I've got a couple of ideas, but I'm still working on it. And it is intrinsically linked to the next thing that is not covered, and that is optimal range. As I told you in my DPS Truths video, I am gathering the data for optimal range, but it's intrinsically linked to accuracy because the further you are from a target, the less rounds on target. But most importantly, today the comparisons will not include weapon talents. Some of the weapons have fixed talents and others have a free slot available for whatever weapon talent you want. Before I can get to that stage, I need to do a deep dive into each of the talents, working out what their uptime is, how long it takes to stack, how quickly they degrade, and what they actually add to DPS. And that's going to take some time. But for that same reason, you're not going to see any named weapons today. and those perfect versions of those talents. Having said that, what you do get today is reflection of in-game performance, those in-game metrics where we've with those in-game inputs. What's also covered is that we will adjust the build for the mods and the attributes that a weapon has. So DPS will be affected by the addition or subtraction of mods and attributes. And that average bullet damage is also adjusted based on those attributes and on those mods on the weapon. So although it's not perfect, in my opinion, it is the most accurate that we have seen so far. But it is a stepping stone. Okay, with those caveats out of the way, let's get into it. 3-slot weapons. Now, the 3-slot build essentially is no change to the standard configuration of my test build. It is 100% weapon damage. So that is 100% all weapon damage and 40% specific weapon damage, together totaling 140. There is no expertise included in any of these weapon systems. Headshot damage is set at 75% for all of the 3-slot weapons. Damage to target out of cover is 18%. That is from 10% from the weapon itself, and it is 8% from the fox's knees. Damage to armor is 8% from the contractor's gloves, and damage to health is 21% from the weapon systems themselves. Crit chance is set at 60%, and I set the build up for this reason so that 3-slot weapons were at 60% crit chance with just 2 crit chance mods on the weapon, and there was no changes that were necessary, giving 3-slot weapons the best chance at success. And the crit damage totals 141%. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So now we're moving on to the 4-slot weapons. So the 4-slot build obviously changes because we now have an additional weapon slot available to us. So weapon damage remains the same, headshot damage remains the same. So it is all of these stats. What changes now is that crit chance is now set at 59%, and the crit damage now goes from 141 to 153%. So why didn't I just slap a crit damage mod onto the weapon and be done with it? Because a 5% crit damage mod on the weapon at a 60% crit chance means that we have a 3% crit damage net gain for the build. Crit chance weapon mod, what I can do is I can remove a 6% crit chance gear mod, replacing that with the 5% crit chance weapon mod, and that will lose us 1% worth of crit chance, which loses us across the original 141% crit damage. It a negative of 1.41%. But what we get to add is we get to replace the 6% crit chance gear mod with a 12% crit damage mod. And we gain 59% of that 12% crit damage, which means that we are gaining 7.08% for a net gain of 5.67%. Better than the 3%. With that said, enjoy the fat beats, and here's the 4-slot weapons. Okay, it's on to the exotics now. Let's go. The build for the capacitor. Still at 140% weapon damage. Headshot damage remains at 75%. Damage to target out of cover. We lose the weapon attribute, being damage to target out of cover, and that drops down to 8%, being just from the fox's knees. Our damage to armor, however, jumps to 20%, being 12% from the weapon and 8% from contractors. Our damage to health drops down to 9.5%, being the weapon attribute. Crit chance, it has a 10% crit chance mod, which puts it in line with the 3-slot variants. But what it does have is one of the best weapon mods in the game, being a 30% crit damage mod, which puts it 30% above where the 3-slot weapons were at 171% crit damage. Chameleon build. Still 140% weapon damage, but the Chameleon, although it's claiming to be an assault rifle, we all know what it's in. For that reason, the headshot damage actually drops from 75 down to 70%. Damage to target out of cover, again, we lose that from the weapon and it goes down to 8%. Damage to armor remains at 8%, and damage to health is still 21% from the weapon. The best build configuration saw us at 58.5% crit chance, but the additional crit chance that the Chameleon offers allows us to jump to 168% crit damage by exchanging mods on the weapon and also our Seska piece for a Grupo. Eagle Bearer, 140% weapon damage. It comes with an additional 10% weapon damage as an attribute on the weapon itself, going to 85%. But we do, once again, lose our damage to targets out of cover. We remain at 8% damage to armor and 21% damage to health. We have a 10% crit chance mod and a 15% crit damage mod, which puts us at 15% over the 3-slot builds at 156% crit damage. Final weapon, the Bighorn. 140% weapon damage. Headshot damage now goes to 105% courtesy of its 30% headshot damage weapon attachment. We lose damage to a target out of cover, going down to just the foxes. Damage to armor and damage to health are consistent. Crit chance, however, we can only get to 56% on the test build, and that only affords us 139% crit damage. The lack of crit chance mods on the Bighorn, the only addition being 10% crit damage from the weapon attribute. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Some of you will have just skipped ahead. I'm fine with that. The burst ranking. So the burst, fire, DPS ranking. Everything is considered a percentage of the highest rated weapon, which receives a 100% rating, and in the case of burst, that weapon is the Bighorn. Even in spite of its lack of attachments, it still manages to deliver the highest amount of burst DPS, assisted greatly by its very quick reload time of just 1.8 seconds and its high base damage. The rest of the field looks like this. We have the capacitor coming in at number 2, once again very much assisted by the fact that it has a 1.8 second reload time. Everyone's darling, the FAMAS, comes in at number 3, and following on down the list. Obviously the weapons like the AK and the SIG with very high reloads are always going to hurt in that burst fire situation. But that takes us to the next category. Sustained rankings. Highest receiving the 100% rank once again goes to the military or black market AK, edging out by a bee's whisker its brother, the AKM, and also the Eagle Bearer as well. It was very, very close, because the Eagle Bearer came in at just over 5 magazines, so it had entered its 6th magazine by a few bullets at the cost of an extra reload included. The AK, both variants, managed to complete all 12 enemies in just prior to their 5th magazine's completion, and they've benefited from it. Now at this point I want to say that if you have increased survivability, you are going to be able to deliver sustained damage at a much greater frequency, which means that if you're running a tank build, then you're probably going to want to pay attention to this list. And if you're running something like glass cannon, then you're not going to be able to hang out there in the wind, continually do damage, because you'll die. And so you are going to be doing burst fire damage a lot more often, popping in and out of cover, and those reload times and the ability to put maximum amount of damage in the shortest period of time is going to be key, and that's where that burst fire ranking comes in. But what we're looking for is the best overall for in-game performance, a mixture of both sustained damage and also burst damage. And when both of those DPSs are averaged, this is the final ranking. Coming in at number 1, the Eagle Bearer. Its 60 round magazine and its 2.1 second reload and 750 rounds per minute make it able to deliver very well on sustained damage because of its ability to maintain its maximum damage output for 4.8 seconds. It does well in burst fire due to having 750 rounds per minute, but also that 2.1 second reload time. Coming in at number 2, just behind the Eagle Bearer, is the FAMAS at 99.56%. Now, I'll look across this list. see where your favorite weapon is, and if it happens to be down the bottom of the list, I will remind you that this is not complete. This is a stepping stone. We're much closer, but this is still a stepping stone. If you love the chameleon, well, when talents are involved, I can tell you the chameleon's talents, all three of them, are absolute beasts. If you love the honey badger, the carbine, the M4, all three of those weapons are laser beams compared to some of these other weapons. So their accuracy is going to play a massive part. Not only that, but those three weapon systems, as well as a number of the others that you see in the second half of this list, have the best optimal range. And what I've already discovered is that the percentage of the time that an engagement will actually occur outside of the optimal range of some of these higher ranked weapons, it will have a material impact on this ranking system. If you notice, there is in fact only 8.35% difference across the top 20 of these assault rifles. This is not the end of the story. What you can see here is that the difference between these weapons is much smaller than any comparison that we will have seen in the past has led us to believe. There's more work to do. That's all from me. If you liked, then like. If you want to see the future content, then subscribe. If you want to have a say in how this journey progresses, then put a comment in the comments. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Fog out.